Maribel Ashwin left an orphanage with no surname, no destination, and 3 copper coins sewn into her sleeve. She never imagined that within months, she would be the only one capable of calming the uncontrollable wolf of the most feared alpha king in the realm. They would share a night born not of romance, but of survival and recognition, one that silenced a curse no healer had ever survived touching. And before dawn, Maribel would disappear. What followed was not grief, or patience, or restraint. The Alpha King abandoned his throne, shattered ancient protocol, and rode into the wilds alone, guided by nothing but the fading scent of a woman who believed she was never meant to be chosen. Because when the only person who can save the monster decides she does not belong beside him, an entire kingdom is forced to reckon with the cost. The doors of St. Rowan's orphanage closed behind Maribel Ashwin with a dull, hollow sound, final, and unmourned. She remained standing on the threshold longer than necessary, as if waiting for someone to call her back. No one did. Everything she owned hung from her shoulder in a fraying cloth satchel, 2 threadbare dresses, a crust of dried bread, and a handkerchief stitched with unfamiliar initials, an artifact from a past she had never been allowed to remember. 3 copper coins were hidden in her sleeve, counted and recounted so many times they felt heavier than gold. Maribel had learned early that names did not protect you, and neither did hope. Survival required movement, not longing. So she stepped forward. And with that single step, she began the journey that would lead her straight into the lair of a cursed king, and into a fate powerful enough to break him, or remake them both. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the part where everything unravels. Maribel Ashwin did not look back as the road bent away from St. Rowan's orphanage. Not because she was brave, and not because she was certain. She had learned that looking back made leaving harder, and she had never been afforded the luxury of hard choices. Only necessary ones. The morning air was thin and sharp, carrying the smell of damp stone and wood smoke from a village already waking without her. The orphanage bell rang somewhere behind her, measured, indifferent. It was not a farewell. It was a signal that breakfast was being served to those who still belonged. Maribel adjusted the strap of her satchel and walked on. She had no plan beyond distance. No destination beyond. The road forked twice before the fields opened into low hills, and she chose paths the way she always had, by which one required the least explanation. She passed farmers who did not look twice at her, merchants who glanced and dismissed her just as quickly. A girl alone was not unusual. A girl without protection was not worth noticing. By midday, hunger began to gnaw. Not sharply, she was used to worse, but persistently, like a reminder she could not silence. She counted her coins again with her thumb through the fabric of her sleeve. 3. Enough to buy bread today. Not enough to buy safety tomorrow. That was when she heard the name. It came from a group of traders resting their horses near a stone well at the edge of a crossroads. Maribel slowed, not out of curiosity, but instinct. Names carried weight. Some could be traded. Others could be avoided. "Drehome," one man muttered, spitting into the dirt. "I'd rather sleep in a ditch than take coin from that mountain." Another laughed without humor. "You won't have the choice much longer. He's hiring again. Servants, guards, anyone desperate enough." A woman tightened her cloak. "They say no one lasts more than a season." "The Alpha King," someone said quietly, as if volume itself might summon him. "Corvin Drehome." The conversation thinned after that, as though the air had gone tight around the word. No one explained why. No one needed to. Everyone knew the stories, even if they pretended not to. Maribel kept walking, but the name followed her. By nightfall, she had traded 1 copper for bread and water and slept beneath a hedgerow with her cloak wrapped tight. The wind cut through the seams of her dress. She dreamed of doors that would not open and woke before dawn with her jaw clenched and her hand wrapped around the handkerchief in her satchel, as if it might vanish if she let go. The second day brought hills. The third brought mountains. The closer she came to the northern stronghold, the more the rumors sharpened. People spoke less freely, voices dropping even indoors. They did not embellish. They did not need to. They said the king did not dine with his court. They said the upper corridors of his castle were sealed once a year. They said chains were reforged annually, thicker each time. They said screams echoed through stone that had never cracked, except on one night. No one used the word curse aloud. Maribel listened and measured the fear against the weight of her hunger, the emptiness of her satchel, the certainty that staying invisible in villages would eventually starve her as surely as boldness might kill her. When she reached the mountain gates of Drehome Keep, the guards barely looked at her face. They looked at her hands. Empty. Clean. Useful. Servants were needed. Questions were not. The castle rose from the rock like something grown rather than built, dark banners, narrow windows, stone worn smooth by centuries of storms. Inside, the air was cool and carried a scent Maribel could not place. Not animal. Not human. Something older. Watching. She learned quickly. Eyes down. Speak only when addressed. Never wander. Never ask about the king. Lysandre Vire oversaw the servants with surgical precision. Her gaze lingered on Maribel longer than necessary, sharp, assessing, displeased in a way that felt personal despite the lack of words. "You will work in the lower halls," she said. "You will not go upstairs. Ever." Maribel nodded. She had survived worse rules. Days passed. Then nights. The castle breathed around her, quiet, restrained, coiled. And beneath it all, a tension that tightened as the calendar turned. The king's birthday approached. On the night it came, the air changed. Maribel felt it before the screams began, a pressure behind her ribs, a sense of something pulling, not outward, but upward. When the first crash echoed through the stone, servants froze. When the second came, someone whispered a prayer. No one moved. Maribel did. Not because she was curious. Curiosity had never kept her alive. She moved because something in her chest answered the sound like a forgotten language being spoken aloud. Each step upward felt wrong. Forbidden. Necessary. The screams were no longer distant when she reached the sealed corridor. Chains rattled. Stone groaned. And when she stepped fully into the light of the upper hall, something ancient and furious lifted its head. The Alpha King smelled her before he saw her. When his eyes found hers, half gold, half mad, the world narrowed to breath and blood and the certainty that she should have been afraid. She wasn't. Instead, she took one more step forward. And the monster went silent. Not slowly. Not reluctantly. One breath it was all teeth and chains and fury, then, as Maribel's palm hovered against the raw heat of his chest, the sound cut off as if someone had closed a door inside the world. The corridor held its breath. Corvin Drehome stood in the center of the room like a thing dragged from legend and forced into flesh, barely human, barely wolf, shackled to iron rings hammered into the stone. His shoulders were too broad, his hands tipped with claws that had gouged the floor. Veins stood dark along his arms as if something inside him had tried to climb out. His eyes, those brutal, burning eyes, locked on her with a focus that was suddenly not madness. It was recognition. Maribel should have run. Every story she'd ever heard was screaming at her to run. Instead, she heard her own pulse and the steadying hush inside him, and she realized with a strange, cold clarity that the thing she'd done could not be undone. His breathing slowed. The half-shift receded like tidewater. Bones softened. Fur withdrew. The claws shortened back into fingers, calloused, trembling, human. A groan left him, low and broken, not a threat but a release that sounded like pain finally finding a way out. Corvin sagged against the chains. His head fell forward, strands of dark hair sliding over a face carved by scars and exhaustion. In the torchlight, he looked less like a monster and more like a man who had been losing a war for too long. Maribel's hand remained where it was, not because she was fearless, but because she didn't know what would happen if she pulled away. His voice came out rough, as if it hadn't been used in years for anything but snarls. Don't move. It wasn't a command meant to control her. It was a warning meant to protect her, from him. Maribel swallowed. Her throat felt too small for the air. I'm not doing anything, she whispered. Corvin's eyes lifted to her hand. Then to her face. The way he looked at her made her feel exposed, as if he could see every hungry year, every silent bruise, every lesson she'd learned about being unwanted. You did something, he said. No one has ever. His words faltered, and something like disbelief tightened his jaw. He tested the chains without thinking, and the iron rattled. Not from rage. From instinct. A body checking its boundaries after a storm. Maribel flinched anyway. Corvin noticed. He went still again, forcing his hands to unclench. Stay where you are, he said, quieter. If you're frightened, say it. I'll turn away. The idea of him turning away, the Alpha King, chained and bleeding, should have been ridiculous. But it wasn't. It made her chest ache with a feeling too sharp to name. I'm not frightened, Maribel lied. Corvin studied her for a long moment, then exhaled as if he'd been holding himself together by will alone. You shouldn't be here, he said. I know. Everyone else knows better. I didn't. He gave a humorless sound that might have been a laugh if it hadn't been so tired. You're not like the others. Maribel's fingers began to tremble, not from fear now, but from the strange, draining sensation under her skin, like warmth leaving her blood. She didn't understand it. She only knew that touching him felt like standing too close to a fire and somehow cooling it down. What is this? She asked, her voice small despite her effort. What's happening to you? Corvin's gaze dropped, not in shame exactly, but in the way a man looks at a wound he's learned to live with. A curse, he said. The word sat heavy in the air. Spoken aloud, it felt like a door opening onto something rotten beneath the castle. It comes every year, he continued. On the night I was born. It pulls my wolf forward until I can't, until I'm not myself. Maribel's stomach tightened. Then why do you let them chain you? She asked before she could stop herself. Corvin's eyes flicked up, sharp. Because if they don't, he said, I tear through everyone who serves this keep. Everyone who sleeps beneath this roof. I have done it before. The way he said it, flat, factual, told her he wasn't confessing for pity. He was stating a consequence he would rather die than repeat. Maribel's throat burned. I've heard the screams, she whispered. The servants, they won't even say your name when the date comes. They shouldn't, Corvin said. Names invite closeness. Closeness invites casualties. His gaze drifted to her again, and the next words came slower, as if they cost him more than admitting the curse. And yet you walked into the mouth of it. Maribel didn't have an answer that sounded like anything but the truth, because something pulled me. She stared at the chain rings in the wall, the gouged stone, the blood on his wrists where iron had chewed his skin raw. No healer could help, she asked. Corvin's expression tightened. Many tried, he said. Witches. Menders. Priests. Men who promised miracles for gold. Women who promised salvation for devotion. His mouth hardened on the last word. Not contempt, something closer to memory. They all failed. Some died. Some ran before the night even peaked. Maribel's hand tingled against him, like it had been plunged in cold water. And me? She asked. Corvin's eyes flashed, gold, then darker. You stopped it, he said. You didn't fight my wolf. You didn't command it. You soothed it. The words sounded wrong in his mouth, as if gentleness didn't belong in the same sentence as him. Maribel shook her head, helpless. I don't know how. I do, Corvin said, and the certainty in his voice made her spine go rigid. Maribel looked at him. He didn't move. He didn't lean forward. He stayed as he was, chained, injured, unarmed. But his gaze held her like a tether. You carry something, he said. In your blood. In your scent. Maribel's stomach dropped. Scent. That word belonged to wolves, to instincts, to things she didn't understand. She began. A servant? Corvin finished, not unkindly. An orphan? A girl who learned to disappear? Maribel's lips parted. Her heart beat once, hard. Corvin watched her as if he could see the exact moment her defenses cracked. No, he said. You are not just anything. The air between them changed. Not into romance. Not into safety. Into something heavier, a truth with teeth. Maribel's fingers finally slipped away from his chest. The moment she did, Corvin's breath hitched, his body responding like it had been bracing for the pain to return. But it didn't. Not fully. The wolf inside him did not surge forward again. It stayed, quiet. Corvin looked down at his wrists, then at her, as if testing reality. You're real, he murmured, almost to himself. Maribel hugged her arms around her ribs. Without contact, she suddenly felt the cold in the stone walls, the danger in the locked corridor, the stupidity of standing alone with the Alpha King at the height of his curse. What do you want from me? She asked. Corvin's jaw flexed. I don't know, he admitted. I haven't been allowed to want anything for a long time. A gust of wind pressed against the high window slits. Torchlight flickered. Somewhere far below, the keep was still pretending this night was ordinary. Corvin shifted his shoulders as if the chains were becoming unbearable now that his mind was his own. Come closer, he said. Maribel stiffened. Corvin's eyes sharpened, then softened again. He corrected himself like a man relearning how to speak without violence. Not to me, he said. To the lock. Maribel hesitated. You can leave, he added. If you want. I won't stop you. She believed him, and that frightened her more than a threat would have. Because it meant he was offering her a choice, and she had never known what to do with those. Still, she stepped toward the chains. The iron cuffs were thick. The lock was old. The keyhole was smeared with blood. Maribel reached into her satchel and pulled out a hairpin, thin as a wish. Her hand shook as she worked. Not because she feared him. Because she feared what her life would become if she succeeded. Behind her, Corvin stayed perfectly still, as if even breathing too hard might break whatever fragile peace she'd given him. The lock clicked. One cuff sprang free. Corvin did not surge forward. He didn't grab her. He simply lowered his arm like it weighed 1,000 years. Maribel swallowed hard and worked on the other. When the second cuff released, the chain slipped from his wrists with a metallic sigh, pulling on the stone like something dead. Corvin stared at his freed hands as if he didn't recognize them. Then he lifted his gaze to Maribel, and for the first time since she'd entered this corridor, she saw something in him that wasn't legend. Loneliness. Why? He asked quietly. Why did you do it? Maribel looked at the chains on the floor, then at the raw red marks around his wrists. I don't know, she said, and hated how true it was. Corvin stepped closer, not sudden, not predatory. Like a wounded animal testing whether it was allowed to exist without pain. Maribel's breath caught anyway. He stopped a careful distance from her. When the wolf took me, he said, voice low, it didn't want to kill you. Maribel blinked. It wanted to claim you, Corvin finished. The words struck like a blow. Maribel's mouth went dry. Her mind tried to reject it, to push it away into the same place she kept every impossible thought. But Corvin's eyes held hers, and she knew he wasn't inventing a story. The bond is old, he continued. Older than crowns. Older than councils. When it happens whether we want it or not. Maribel's chest tightened until it hurt. And what if I don't want it? She asked. Corvin's expression flickered with something that might have been pain or respect. Then I will not force you, he said. But I will not pretend it isn't there. Silence settled between them, heavy as snow. Maribel's fingers curled around the edge of her satchel strap like it was a rope keeping her from falling. Corvin's gaze dropped to her hands. What are those initials? He asked. Maribel flinched, the question too close to the only mystery she carried. I don't know, she said. The handkerchief, it came with me. That's all they told me. Something sharpened in Corvin's face, just briefly. Not suspicion, instinct. He breathed in, subtle, as if tasting the air around the question. Then he looked away, jaw tight, as though he'd reached the edge of something he wasn't ready to speak. You should rest, he said, voice rough. This night is not done with me. But the worst of it, it's quiet now. Maribel glanced toward the corridor behind her. If I leave, the guards. They won't come here, Corvin said. Not tonight. They fear what they cannot control. A bitter edge touched the words. Maribel hesitated. Corvin turned toward the narrow cot in the corner, more like a soldier's bed than a king's, and sank onto it with a heaviness that made the room feel suddenly smaller. He pressed his fingers to his brow as if the pain had only changed shape, not disappeared. Maribel stood frozen, torn between survival and something stranger, something that felt like responsibility. Corvin's voice came quiet, scraped raw. "Stay," he said. "Just until morning." Maribel's instincts screamed that staying was the dangerous choice. But the wolf was quiet. The night, for the first time, did not feel like it was trying to swallow her whole. So she stayed. And in the torchlight and stone, two people who had spent their lives being feared and forgotten sat in the same room, breathing the same air, pretending for a moment that the world could not find them. Time in the upper corridor did not move like it did below. It thickened. It slowed. It became something you could feel against your skin. Corvin's breathing steadied. His shoulders eased fraction by fraction, as if his body had been braced for agony so long it had forgotten how to uncoil. Maribel watched him in silence, careful not to make sudden movements, careful not to remind herself that she was alone with the most feared ruler in the realm. But fear wasn't the dominant thing now. It was the strangeness of peace. Corvin lifted his head and looked at her like he was still checking that she hadn't vanished. "What is your name?" he asked. "Maribel," she said. No surname followed. There never was one. Corvin nodded once, as if he heard what she didn't say. "My council would call you foolish for being here," he said. "My guards would call you dead already." Maribel's throat tightened. "And you?" Corvin's mouth twitched with something not quite a smile. "I would call you impossible." Maribel swallowed. "I didn't mean to." "I know," Corvin said, cutting gently through her panic. "That's why it matters." He shifted his gaze to the marks on his wrists. His fingers traced the broken skin with a detached sort of familiarity. "This curse," he said, "is a trap built into my own blood. On my birthday, my wolf tries to tear me in half, man on one side, beast on the other." Maribel's brows pulled together. "Why?" Corvin exhaled. "No one knows. Not truly. Some say it was laid on my line for conquest. Others say it was laid for mercy, so we could never become too powerful without paying a price." His voice darkened. "All I know is that it has ruined every attempt at closeness. Every vow. Every promise. Everything human." Maribel stared at him, and the ache that rose in her chest startled her. She did not know him. She should not care. But loneliness had a language, and she knew it too well. "What happened tonight?" she asked quietly. "Why did it stop when I touched you?" Corvin's eyes lifted. "I don't know the full answer," he said. "But I know what it feels like when a healer is near." Maribel stiffened. "I'm not a healer." Corvin didn't argue. He simply held her gaze. "You are something," he said. "A bloodline they thought was gone. Or hunted until it hid." The room seemed to tighten around that word, hunted. Maribel's fingers went cold. "No one's hunting me." Corvin's expression flickered. A shadow crossed it, knowledge, maybe, or instinct. "No," he said, and his voice was too careful. "Not yet." Maribel's heart beat once, hard. Corvin looked away again, like a man realizing he'd spoken too close to something dangerous. "I'm not asking you to understand it tonight," he said. "Only to accept what happened." My wolf rested. For the first time since I was a boy. Maribel's throat tightened. You make it sound like I fixed you. Corvin's voice dropped. No. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, hands clasped as if holding himself together. You didn't fix me, he said. You reached me. The words landed heavier than any declaration of desire. Because they weren't romantic. They were raw. Maribel didn't know what to do with them. She shifted, uncomfortable, and her satchel brushed her hip. The faint outline of the handkerchief inside pressed against the fabric. A relic of an unknown beginning. A reminder that she had never belonged to anyone. Corvin's gaze dipped to the bag, then rose again. Do you know what you are to me? He asked. Maribel's stomach sank. She didn't answer. Corvin's jaw flexed, as if he hated the vulnerability of the truth. You're a weakness, he said. A dangerous one. Maribel flinched. And you're also, he paused, as if the word cost him. A relief. Silence expanded between them. Maribel's pulse hammered. Her mind tried to flatten the moment into something practical. I should leave. I should go back down. This is madness. But her body didn't move. Corvin's gaze held hers, and the air felt charged with something old, instinct, fate, the kind of bond stories used to warn girls about. Maribel had spent her whole life learning to be unchosen. She didn't know how to stand inside a moment where she was the center of anything. Corvin reached out slowly, not to grab, but to offer his hand like a question. Maribel stared at it, at the scars, at the strength, at the tremor that proved he wasn't invincible. Her fingers lifted, hesitant, and rested against his palm. The effect was immediate. Corvin's shoulders loosened as if a knot inside him had finally been cut. His eyes fluttered shut for one brief second, and when he opened them again, the gold had softened, still wolf, but no longer a weapon. Maribel's breath shuddered out. Corvin's voice was low. Stay. She should have refused. Instead, she nodded. That night was not indulgence. It wasn't a fantasy. It was two broken beings finding a pocket of quiet in a world that only understood violence. Corvin pulled her closer, not roughly, not greedily, like someone drawing warmth toward a body that had been cold for too long. Maribel rested her forehead against the curve of his shoulder armor where it lay discarded beside the cot, and she felt the steady rhythm of his heart beneath scars and muscle. The wolf inside him did not thrash. It did not snarl. It rested. Maribel didn't know when the line blurred between sitting beside him and being held by him. Between keeping him calm and needing the calm herself. She only knew that for a handful of hours, the castle did not feel like a prison. And then, slowly, the darkness thinned. Dawn seeped into the upper corridor like a quiet betrayal. Maribel woke first. The air was colder. The torches had burned down. Pale light pressed through the narrow windows, turning stone into ash-colored reality. Corvin slept beside her, not like a king, not like a monster. Like a man emptied out by pain and finally allowed to fall. Maribel lay still, staring at his face. In the gray morning, he looked different. Younger in the places the night had softened. Older in the shadows beneath his eyes. The scars on his cheek stood out like a warning. This was not a life that made room for someone like her. The weight of the truth returned, crushing and familiar. I am still a servant. He is still a king. Nothing that happened in the dark could change the hierarchy that ruled daylight. If anyone found her here? Her stomach nodded. She could already hear the whispers. Feel the looks. The silent punishment disguised as order. And worse than that, she could feel hope trying to bloom. Maribel's throat tightened. Hope was a trap. Hope was how you ended up starving with empty hands because you believed someone would come back for you. She carefully slid out from the cot, moving as if the air itself might wake him. Her satchel lay near the wall. She retrieved it, hands shaking, and the handkerchief slipped partly free, a corner of embroidered fabric catching the dawn light. Those unknown initials stared up at her like an accusation. She held it for a moment, thumb tracing the stitching. Someone left you once, she thought. And no one came back. Maribel folded it slowly and then, without fully understanding why, set it on the cot near Corvin's hand. A piece of herself she could not carry into the world. A mistake she could not erase. She turned toward the corridor. And froze. Lysandra Vire stood at the archway like she had been carved there, cloak immaculate, hair pinned back, expression perfectly composed. Her eyes flicked once over Maribel's rumpled dress, the cot, the handkerchief. Then her mouth curved into something polite and poisonous. So, Lysandra said softly, the orphan thought she could crawl into the king's bed and leave with her head still attached. Maribel's face went cold. Lysandra lifted a hand. Save it. Her gaze was sharp enough to cut. You will leave, Lysandra said. Now. Quietly. Before the keep wakes and you become a scandal I have to clean. Maribel's throat tightened. He asked me to stay. Lysandra's smile thinned. He asks for many things in the dark, she said. In the light, he remembers what he is. Maribel flinched as if struck. Lysandra stepped closer, voice dropping. You were allowed here because you were useful tonight, she murmured. Do not mistake usefulness for belonging. The words slid into the exact wound Maribel had carried her whole life. Maribel's fingers curled around her satchel strap until it hurt. Lysandra tilted her head. Go. Maribel swallowed the sting in her eyes, swallowed the humiliation, swallowed the part of her that wanted to scream that she hadn't meant for any of this. Because meaning had never mattered. Only consequences. She walked past Lysandra without another word. The halls below were waking. Guards shifted. Servants moved like shadows. No one looked at her directly, but she felt the weight of eyes anyway, the sense that something had already changed. She reached the outer doors with her heart pounding. And then she ran. Out into the pale morning, down the mountain road, into the open land where the wind could tear away her scent and her shame. She did not stop until her lungs burned. Behind her, in the high corridor, Corvin Drehome woke to emptiness. His hand reached instinctively for warmth, and closed on air. His eyes snapped open. For one terrible second, he didn't remember why the pain was quiet. Then he saw the broken chains on the floor and the blood on his wrists, and he remembered her. Maribel, he rasped, already sitting up. The room answered with silence. His gaze caught on the handkerchief beside him. He picked it up, frowning at the unfamiliar initials, the delicate stitching that didn't belong in a place like this. Then he inhaled. Her scent was there, fading fast, carried away by distance. Something inside him surged, not the curse this time, but the wolf, awake, furious, possessive in a way that made the room feel too small. Corvin's jaw clenched. She hadn't been taken. She had left. The realization hit like a blade. He stood, moving with sudden purpose, and the keep seemed to feel it, stone waking, old power stirring. Minutes later, the council chamber below erupted in confusion. Orders were issued. Guards scrambled. Horses were called for. Lysandra Vire watched the chaos with a face like still water. And when no one was looking, she slipped away to her private quarters and wrote a letter with hands that did not tremble. The wax seal she pressed into it was not Drahome's. It belonged to a rival crest, sharp lines, a predatory crown. Baylor Kane. She sent the letter by fast rider before the sun cleared the mountains. The king's curse is worse than they admit, the message read in essence. And the girl who calmed it has no protection. In the courtyard, Corvin tightened the saddle straps himself. He did not wear the ceremonial cloak. He did not take an escort. He did not wait for approval. The council tried to speak. He silenced them with a single look. His eyes were gold in the morning light, wolf-bright, fixed on the road beyond the gates. She ran, someone dared to say, as if it was an insult. Corvin mounted, reins snapping tight in his fist. "She is mine," he said, voice low enough to be a promise and a threat at once. Then he rode out. Not as a ruler. As a hunter. Maribel ran until the mountain air thinned into open land and the stone shadow of Drahome Keep became a memory behind her. For a time, the world almost let her believe she was free. The road widened into rolling fields the color of old gold. Wind combed through tall grass and carried away tracks, scent, and sound. Villages appeared like small, harmless clusters in the distance, smoke, roofs, the illusion of ordinary life. She kept to the edges, bought bread with her last copper, and slept in places no one would think to look, abandoned sheds, under hedges, inside the hollow of a fallen tree. She told herself she'd done the right thing. She told herself it had only been one night. But truth had a way of returning in quiet moments, when she closed her eyes and felt the remembered steadiness of Corvin's breath against her palm. When her body woke expecting warmth that wasn't there. When she realized, with a sickness that wouldn't leave, that she had not only abandoned a king. She had abandoned a man in chains. On the third day, she found a stream and washed her face, scrubbing at the feeling of the castle as if it were soot. Her reflection stared back, a young woman with wind-tangled hair, sleepless eyes, and a bruise-colored exhaustion that made her look older than she was. She was safe, she insisted. No one was chasing an orphan. No one cared enough. The idea should have soothed her. Instead, it made her stomach twist with shame. By late afternoon, clouds gathered low and the light turned bruised. Maribel followed a narrow path into a stand of trees, hoping to find shelter before the rain. The forest smelled of wet bark and moss. The hush of it felt comforting, like a blanket pulled over the world. That was when she heard hooves. Not the heavy, steady rhythm of a farmer's cart. Not the solitary clip of a traveler. This was a coordinated sound. A hunting sound. Maribel froze. Her breath caught in her throat. The hooves stopped. Silence spread through the trees like a held breath. A voice drifted between the trunks, calm, amused. "Careful," it said. "You'll make yourself easy to catch." Maribel's heart slammed once, hard. She turned, slow, scanning for movement. Men stepped out from the shadows, 3 of them at first, then more, half a dozen wolves in human form, dressed in travel leathers and dark cloaks. Their eyes held a faint glint even in the dim light, gold or gray or something between. They moved like predators who didn't need to rush because the outcome was already decided. Maribel backed up, fingers curling around the strap of her satchel like it might become a weapon. "Who are you?" she demanded, though her voice betrayed her with a tremor. One man smiled, showing a hint of canine sharpness. "Friends," he said. "To a king who is very interested in you." Maribel's stomach dropped. "Corvin." The wolf's smile widened. "Not that king." Cold spread through her limbs. She turned to run. A hand caught her arm, iron strong. Another seized her satchel. Maribel fought, twisting, scratching, kicking, but they were too fast, too practiced. One slammed her against a tree hard enough to knock the breath from her chest. "Easy," a voice murmured near her ear. "We're not here to hurt you, little bird." The endearment made her skin crawl. "Let me go," she rasped. A different man leaned close, breathing in, sampling her scent like it was information. His eyes narrowed. "Oh," he said softly. "That's the Drehome wolf on you." Maribel went still. The man's gaze flicked to the others. "Our Lord will be pleased." They bound her wrists, not with rope, but with a length of chain so thin it looked decorative until she tried to pull against it and realized it was forged with something that bit into her skin like cold. Maribel's pulse hammered. Her mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. "Where are you taking me?" she asked. "Somewhere you'll be safe," the first man said lightly, as if reading a bedtime story. "Until the duel." Maribel stared at him. "What duel?" The wolves exchanged looks, pleased, almost. As if she'd asked exactly the question they wanted. "An old one," the man replied. "An ancestral law. A clean way to settle dirty disputes." Fear sharpened into something worse. Understanding. She had run to protect herself, to keep from being crushed by the weight of a king's world. But she had never considered that her existence could be used like a blade. She had never considered that by fleeing, she'd made herself reachable. And if she was reachable, then so was Corvin's weakness. Maribel swallowed, throat burning. "What have I done?" They dragged her through the forest to a waiting horse and threw her across the saddle like cargo. Rain began to fall in thin needles, cold as judgment. She kept her head down and listened, searching for any hint of where they were going. Names slipped between them like coins. Vaylor will want her present when he issues it. Drehome won't ignore the challenge. He can't. Not with his curse. Maribel's chest tightened. She clung to those fragments like lifelines, even as each one confirmed what she feared. This wasn't about her. Not truly. This was about Corvin. Hours later, the forest thinned and the land opened into a wide, wind-scoured valley. Torches burned along a ridgeline, their flames bent sideways by the gusts. Tents stood like dark teeth against the rain. Guards patrolled the perimeter in disciplined lines. An encampment built for spectacle. Built for witnesses. Maribel was hauled down from the horse and marched through mud toward the largest tent, where a carved crest hung above the entrance, a predatory crown split by a claw mark. The air around it smelled of wolf and smoke and ambition. Inside, warmth hit her face, firelight, furs, the thick scent of leather and iron. A man stood with his back to her, hands clasped behind him, as if he'd been waiting so long he'd memorized the sound of her footsteps. When he turned, Maribel understood instantly why men followed him. Vaylor Kane was not as large as Corvin, but he wore power differently. Where Corvin's strength felt like a storm held back by restraint, Baylor's felt like a blade sharpened for pleasure. His hair was pale, almost silver. His eyes were a cold, predatory gray. His smile was beautiful in the way a trap is beautiful, designed to make you step closer. "So," Baylor said, voice smooth. "The orphan from St. Rowan." Maribel lifted her chin, though her wrists burned against the chain. "I don't know you," she said. Baylor stepped closer, studying her like a map. "No," he agreed. "But I know him." Something in his gaze sharpened, delighted. "I know what his counsel hides," Baylor continued. "I know what his wolves fear." And now, his eyes dipped briefly, as if seeing something beneath her skin. "Now I know what calmed him." Maribel's stomach twisted. "I didn't." Baylor's hand lifted, and one of his men shoved Maribel to her knees. The humiliation struck harder than the mud. Baylor crouched to meet her eye level, unbothered by the filth. "You did," he murmured. "Whether you meant to or not. And because you did, you've become precious." Maribel's voice came out raw. "To you?" Baylor's smile widened. "To the realm," he corrected. "To the hierarchy. To the old laws that still bind us no matter what crowns pretend." He stood and moved back toward the fire, hands folding as if delivering a sermon. "I've wanted Draholm's land for years," he said casually. "The mountain pass, the rivers, the trade routes. But war is expensive. Blood is messy. Wolves grow loyal when they bleed together." He glanced over his shoulder at her. "So I'll take it the old way." Maribel's heart hammered. "What old way?" Baylor's eyes gleamed. "The ancestral alpha duel," he said, like speaking a beloved tradition. "A sanctioned challenge. Neutral ground. Witnesses from every pack. Winner takes territory." He paused, savoring it. "And the winner takes the Luna." Maribel's breath stopped. "I'm not," she began, but the words collapsed in her throat under the sheer wrongness of it. She wasn't a Luna. She wasn't anyone. She was a servant who had made a mistake and run. Baylor watched the panic rise in her and smiled as if it pleased him. "You don't get to decide what you are," he said softly. "Not once the bond is known." Maribel's pulse roared in her ears. "Corvin won't come." Baylor laughed, low. "He will." Maribel shook her head, desperate. "He has a council. He has a kingdom." Baylor's gaze turned sharp. "He has a curse," he said. "And he has pride. He cannot ignore a challenge issued under ancestral law. If he does, his wolves will see it as weakness. The realm will see it as surrender." He stepped close enough that Maribel could smell wine on his breath and iron beneath it. "And if he tries to send an army?" Baylor continued, voice silk over steel. "I slit your throat and hang your handkerchief from his gate." Maribel went cold. "Handkerchief." The word landed like a stone in her stomach, because she realized then Baylor knew about the only thing she had left behind. The only thing Corvin would have in his hand when he woke. Baylor's smile returned, satisfied. "You see," he murmured. "You're collateral. You're bait. You're leverage." Maribel's throat burned. "I never wanted this," she whispered. Baylor tilted his head, as if considering whether that mattered. "Most fate is unwanted," he said. "That's what makes it fate." He straightened and nodded to his men. Take her. Chain her where she can be seen. Maribel was dragged out of the tent and led toward a raised platform near the center of the encampment. Torches ringed it, flames spitting in the rain. Iron posts stood at the edge, with fresh chains coiled at their bases. Chains again. The symbolism hit her like nausea. She had freed one king from chains, only to be locked in them herself. They fastened her wrists above her head, the links cold and unforgiving. The posture forced her upright, exposed. A display. Wolves passed and looked at her with interest, disdain, curiosity. Some with pity. Most with calculation. Maribel's shoulders ached. Rain soaked her hair and ran down her face like tears she refused to shed. The sky darkened fully. And then, far beyond the ridge, a horn sounded, long and low. Another answered. The encampment shifted. Wolves straightened. Torches flared as if fed by anticipation. Maribel's heart slammed. A figure appeared on the distant slope, riding alone through the rain. A single horse. A single rider. No escort. Even from far away, the air changed around him, as if the world recognized its predator king. Corvin Drehome rode into the valley like a storm-given shape. And when he drew closer, Maribel saw it. His eyes were gold-bright even in the dark, fixed on her with a fury so intense it felt like heat on her skin. He reined in before the platform, mud splashing up his cloak. He didn't look at the tents. He didn't look at the wolves watching from every side. He looked only at Maribel. And in that look, she understood something devastating. He had come because she mattered. Not as leverage. As his. A voice rang out across the valley, smooth and triumphant. Corvin Drehome. Baylor stepped into view, immaculate despite the rain, wearing armor carved with ancient symbols. The challenge is issued, Baylor announced. Under ancestral law. Neutral ground. Witnesses present. Corvin didn't respond. His gaze never left Maribel. Baylor's smile sharpened. Do you accept? Corvin's jaw clenched. And then he spoke, low, fierce, carrying through the rain like a vow. I accept. Maribel's stomach dropped. Because acceptance meant the duel would happen. Acceptance meant blood. And if Corvin's curse rose in the middle of it, she had not only endangered him, she may have delivered him to his ruin. Corvin's eyes flicked up to the chains above her wrists, then back to her face. Hold on, he said, voice barely above a whisper meant only for her. Maribel swallowed hard, rain on her lips tasting like metal. I'm sorry, she tried to say. But the horn sounded again, louder, demanding, and Baylor's voice cut through the valley. Then let the realm witness, he declared, which alpha stands whole, and which one breaks. Maribel's breath caught. Because at that moment, she felt it. A subtle tremor in the air, like a distant growl. The curse wasn't waiting for Corvin's birthday anymore. It was waking early. And the duel hadn't even begun. The arena was not stone walls and cheering stands. It was earth and weather and wolves. A wide ring had been marked in the valley floor with ash and salt, old symbols pressed into mud as if the land itself was being asked to remember. Torches flared along the boundary, their flames bent sideways by the wind. Beyond them, packs gathered in layered rows, alphas in front, betas behind, warriors flanking like living blades. No one spoke loudly. Even the rain sounded muted, as if the world understood this was sacred violence. Maribel stood chained at the platform's edge, high enough to be seen and low enough to be reached. A trophy before the fight was even won. She tried to pull her wrists free. The chains bit deeper. Pain lanced through her shoulders. Her gaze found Corvin. He had dismounted and removed his cloak, handing it to no one. There was no one. He truly had come alone. His armor was dark and functional, battered in places as if he'd ridden hard and dressed fast. Mud clung to his boots. A thin cut ran along his cheekbone, fresh. He looked like a man who hadn't slept. He looked like a king who had chosen war over pride. Baylor stepped into the ring with the easy confidence of someone who enjoyed spectacle. His armor was ornate, silvered, designed for eyes. He carried no shield. His sword was long, narrow, hungry. Corvin carried a blade too, but he held it differently. Not like a showman. Like a man who had killed before and wished he didn't have to again. Baylor raised his voice to the watching packs. "Witnesses," he called, "hear the terms. By ancestral law, this duel determines territory and dominance. If Corvin Draholm falls, Draholms pass and rivers become Cane land." A murmur ran through the crowd. "And the bonded female," Baylor continued, gesturing lazily toward Maribel, "becomes mine by right of victory." Maribel's stomach heaved. She felt eyes slide over her like hands. Corvin's shoulders tightened. The wolf in him stirred, a ripple, contained but present. Baylor smiled, pleased with the reaction he'd earned. He turned to Corvin. "Do you contest the terms?" Corvin's gaze was fixed on Baylor now, and something in it was colder than hatred. "I contest you breathing," Corvin said. Baylor laughed softly. Spoken like a man who believes fury is enough. He stepped back, lifting his sword. "Then begin." A horn blared. The sound snapped through the valley like a whip. Baylor moved first, quick, clean, calculated. His blade flashed in a straight line meant to draw blood fast and establish control. Corvin met it with a block that rang through the rain, metal biting metal. The shock of impact traveled up Corvin's arms. He didn't flinch. They circled. Baylor's footwork was elegant. His attacks came in patterns, feints, pivots, cuts designed to exhaust rather than kill. He wasn't trying to end it quickly. He was trying to prolong it. Maribel realized it with a sudden cold clarity. Baylor didn't want a clean victory. He wanted Corvin's curse to surface in front of the realm. He wanted witnesses to see the great Alpha King lose himself. Corvin pressed forward with heavier strikes, forcing Baylor back step by step. His style was brutal, direct, less art, more force. Each blow landed with a finality that made the watching wolves tense. But Baylor slipped away each time, like smoke, like strategy. Minutes stretched. Rain thickened. Mud clung to their boots, slowing movement, increasing risk. Baylor's blade nicked Corvin's arm. A shallow cut, but blood welled bright against dark armor. A cheer rose from Baylor's side of the packs. Corvin didn't look down. He drove forward again. Baylor parried, then twisted, the motion too smooth, his sword slicing across Corvin's ribs. Corvin grunted. The sound was tight, contained. Maribel's hands clenched around chain links above her, helpless. Corvin's eyes flashed gold. Not from anger. From something deeper. The wolf. Baylor saw it too. His smile sharpened mid-fight as if he'd been waiting for that exact flicker. "There it is," Baylor breathed, audible only because the ring had gone so quiet. The crack. Corvin's jaw clenched. He surged, landing a hit that finally drove Baylor back hard. Baylor's boots slipped in mud and he caught himself at the boundary, torchlight flaring against his armor. The crowd murmured, some impressed, some afraid. Baylor lifted a hand, wiping rain from his mouth. "Stronger than rumor," he admitted. But rumor didn't mention her touch. He flicked his gaze toward Maribel. "And without her," he murmured, "how long can you hold yourself together?" Corvin's gaze snapped to Maribel for a fraction of a second. And in that fraction, Baylor struck. The blade went low, fast, aimed for Corvin's thigh, crippling, not killing. Corvin twisted, but not enough. Steel cut through leather. Blood spilled hot and dark. Corvin staggered one step. The world seemed to lean toward him. Baylor backed away, satisfied. "Yes," he said softly. "Bleed. Struggle. Let them see what you truly are." Corvin's breathing changed. It deepened. It was rough. His shoulders rose as if something beneath his skin was swelling, pressing outward. His fingers tightened around the hilt until knuckles went white. Maribel felt it before she saw it, the same pressure she'd felt in the upper corridor. The same sense of a beast rising, a man being pushed aside. The curse wasn't waiting. It was here. The watching pack shifted, suddenly nervous. Some stepped back without realizing they were moving. Others leaned in, hungry for spectacle. Baylor's eyes gleamed. "Come on, Drehome," he taunted. "Show them." Corvin growled. The sound was not fully human. Maribel's chest constricted. She remembered the chains on stone. The screams. The terror. If he loses himself now, he would be slaughtered. Not because Baylor was stronger. Because the realm feared what it couldn't control. Because if Corvin became the monster, the world would call Baylor the savior. Corvin's hands trembled. His eyes flared brighter gold. His breath came in harsh bursts, like something inside him was clawing for air. Baylor stepped closer, blade poised, waiting for the moment Corvin fully broke. Maribel's vision blurred with panic. And then she understood, with a sudden brutal clarity, she could not fix this with touch. She was chained. Too far away. Too visible. All she had left was her voice. Not magic. Truth. "Corvin," she cried. Her voice tore through the rain, sharp enough to slice the hush. Corvin's head jerked toward her, eyes blazing. Maribel swallowed hard, forcing the words out even as fear tried to choke them. "I ran because I thought I didn't deserve to stay," she shouted, voice shaking. "I ran because I was terrified of hope. Because my whole life taught me that being chosen is a lie people tell right before they leave you." The crowd stilled. Even Baylor paused. Maribel's throat burned, but she didn't stop. "But you weren't leaving," she cried. "You were holding on. You were trying, and I abandoned you in chains because I believed I belonged nowhere." Corvin's breath hitched. The wolf inside him snarled, then hesitated, as if confused by the emotion cutting through its rage. Maribel's eyes stung. "I'm here now," she said, voice breaking. "Not because I'm brave. Because I'm done disappearing." For a heartbeat, Corvin stood perfectly still. Then something shifted in him, not outward, but inward. His shoulders lowered. His grip on the blade loosened by a fraction. His eyes remained gold, but the madness didn't take them. Baylor's smile faltered. Corvin drew in a slow breath. And instead of fighting the wolf, instead of shoving it down like a disease, he let it rise with him. Not as a takeover. As an integration. The change wasn't dramatic in the way witnesses expected. There was no violent half-shift, no snapping bones, no scream. There was only Corvin's posture settling into something whole. Man and beast aligned. The gold in his eyes deepened, not wild, but clear. A quiet power rolled off him that made the torches gutter. Baylor took one involuntary step back. Corvin spoke, voice low, threaded with something ancient. "I have spent my life resisting myself," he said. Then he lifted his sword again, not trembling now. "Certain." "And you," Corvin continued, gaze fixed on Baylor, "built your victory on the assumption that I would keep hating what I am." Baylor's jaw tightened. He lunged, trying to reclaim momentum with speed. Corvin moved like the storm he'd always been, only now, he wasn't fractured. He parried once. Twice. Then he stepped inside Baylor's guard and slammed his shoulder into Baylor's chest, driving him back through mud and rain. Baylor recovered fast, slashing upward. Corvin twisted with inhuman precision and caught Baylor's wrist, barehanded. The crowd gasped. Corvin's grip tightened. Baylor's blade fell from numb fingers into the mud. Baylor's eyes widened, shock cracking his composure. Corvin didn't kill him. He didn't need to. He forced Baylor down to one knee, pressing the edge of his own blade to Baylor's throat. "Submit," Corvin said. Baylor's lips peeled back in a snarl. "Never." Corvin leaned closer, eyes burning, but steady. "Submit," he repeated. "Or bleed out in front of every pack you tried to impress." The rain beat down. Mud sucked at boots. Torches hissed. Baylor's pride fought for one more breath. Then the weight of witnesses crushed it. Slowly, bitterly, Baylor lowered his head. "I submit," he spat. A roar rose from the crowd, shock, awe, fear. Corvin stepped back, sheathing his blade as if the fight had been a formality. Then he turned, ignoring Baylor, ignoring the packs, ignoring every rule that had ever been written for kings, and walked straight to Maribel. Chains clinked as she shifted, stunned. Her wrists throbbed. Her breath came fast. Corvin reached the platform and looked up at her. His eyes were still gold, but there was no madness in them. Only certainty. He lifted his hand and brushed wet hair from her face with a gentleness that didn't match the battlefield around them. The crowd murmured, restless. Baylor's men stiffened. Corvin didn't care. He seized the chain above her wrists and, without hesitation, ripped it from the post. Iron shrieked. The metal tore free like it was nothing. Maribel gasped as her arms dropped. Corvin caught her before she could stumble, pulling her into him like the world might try to steal her again. The contact hit her like a remembered night, calm flooding where panic had lived. Corvin turned, keeping her close, and faced the watching realm. His voice carried. "This is Maribel Ashwin," he said. "And she is mine." A wave moved through the packs, disbelief, outrage, awe. A servant. An orphan. Claimed openly. Corvin's jaw tightened. "She will not be hidden," he said. Not by councils. Not by tradition. Not by wolves who mistake cruelty for order. Then, as if the world hadn't already cracked, an older wolf stepped forward from among the witnesses, gray-haired, eyes sharp with memory. He stared at Maribel's face like he'd seen it somewhere else. His gaze dropped to Corvin's hand. To the handkerchief. Because Corvin still had it, tucked into his belt like a banner, stained now by rain and battle. The elder's breath caught. That stitching, he whispered, voice trembling. Those initials. Maribel's chest tightened. She touched the fabric without thinking, fingers brushing embroidered thread. The elder's eyes lifted to hers. Child, he said, where did you get that? Maribel swallowed. It came with me, she whispered. From the orphanage. The elder went pale. No, he breathed. It can't be. Corvin's gaze sharpened. Speak. The elder's eyes flicked to the watching wolves, then back to Maribel, as if he feared the truth would reawaken an old purge. That handkerchief belonged to Maribel Ashwin, he said, voice breaking. The healer who vanished the night the court ordered all magic bearers burned. Maribel's stomach dropped. Healer. The elder nodded, eyes shining with something like grief. She hid her child, he whispered. A daughter. To save her. Maribel's breath caught. The world tilted. Corvin's arm tightened around her. The elder's gaze moved to Corvin, fear and reverence mixing. And your curse, he said, voice shaking now. It wasn't punishment. It was prophecy. A forcing. A cruelty designed to drive you to the one blood that could steady you, and bring the realm to this moment. The valley went silent. Even Valor, kneeling in mud, looked up, horror dawning as he realized what he'd helped reveal. Maribel's hand shook. I don't understand. Corvin's voice came low, fierce, not at her, but at the world. They hunted healers, he said. And the realm rotted for it. He lifted his gaze to the watching packs. This ends, Corvin declared. Tonight, the old knowledge returns. The hidden come back into the light. The elder nodded once, tears in his eyes. They will come, he whispered. If you protect them. Corvin looked down at Maribel, gold eyes steady. You are not invisible, he said, as if speaking a vow into her bones. Not anymore. Maribel's throat burned. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to collapse into that belief and never let it go. But belief was dangerous. So she asked the only question that mattered. What happens now? She whispered. Corvin's gaze lifted to the horizon, where dawn was beginning to thin the storm clouds. Now, he said, we go home. And as the packs watched, stunned, unsettled, unsure whether they'd witnessed victory or revolution, Corvin Drehome mounted his horse with Maribel held in front of him like a promise. The handkerchief snapped in the wind from his belt. Chains lay broken in the mud. Valor Kane knelt, defeated, but not dead, forced to live under the shame of submission. And far beyond the valley, in places where healers had hidden for generations, something ancient stirred awake. Not because a king had conquered, but because, for the first time, a king had become whole. Not a triumph of power, but of belonging. If this story caught your attention, subscribe so you don't miss the next tale.